final whistle echoed around the stadium. Spain were officially world champions. But then something happened that football almost never sees. The entire football world stopped being diplomatic. One by one, inside TV studios, mixed zones, radio shows, and across social media on 3 different continents, legends, managers, pundits, and even players who had just witnessed the chaos began saying what everyone had been thinking. And when you place all of their reactions side by side, it no longer feels like scattered opinions. Starts to sound like a verdict. So forget my opinion for a moment. Listen to the people who were actually there and those who know this game better than almost anyone else. Because the football world has spoken about why Argentina's players are now facing possible World Cup bans. And their message is absolutely ruthless. First, let's quickly rewind to what happened. You probably watched it unfold, and you definitely felt the tension. Spain defeated Argentina 1-0 after extra time to lift the World Cup. But within barely 90 seconds of the final whistle, Argentina completely lost their composure. While Spain celebrated, Nahuel Molina appeared to strike Rodri. Leandro Paredes grabbed Eric Garcia by the throat before dragging Gavi to the ground. And the moment that escalated this from a players' confrontation into a federation-level controversy came when Argentina assistant coach Roberto Ayala was caught on camera placing his hands around the neck of Spain's Dani Olmo. To make matters worse, most of the Argentina squad turned their backs while Spain lifted the trophy. FIFA has now opened a formal disciplinary investigation, and genuine suspensions are reportedly being considered. That's where things stand. Now listen to how the football world reacted. Let's begin with someone who has lived this stage himself. Thierry Henry, a man who knows exactly what it feels like to play in a World Cup final, immediately focused on one thing: respect. You can lose your emotions for a moment, he explained, but respect should never disappear. Having experienced that level of pressure himself, Henry admitted he understood the emotions, yet insisted that football should leave children remembering the match, not the fighting. He described the scenes as deeply disappointing and added that if FIFA's investigation confirms the reports, bans would not surprise him in the slightest. That's not an emotional rival speaking. That's one of football's most respected voices calmly suggesting suspensions would be justified. Wayne Rooney was even more direct. His response came in just 2 simple words: ban them. His argument couldn't have been clearer. If players are allowed to behave like this after losing a World Cup final without serious consequences, then every team around the world receives the wrong message about what is acceptable. But Rooney also voiced the concern many supporters were already thinking. We all know FIFA, he said, and they may eventually find a way to avoid handing out punishments that truly hurt anyone. Keep that thought in mind because it's at the center of this entire story. Then came Zlatan Ibrahimovic, who reacted exactly the way only Zlatan can. Watching Paredes confront Gavi, he joked that if he had been on that pitch himself, he would have headbutted Paredes, accepted the red card, and moved on. He even criticized Spain's players for not stepping in more forcefully to protect their teammate. That's classic Zlatan, full of theater and personality. But underneath the entertainment was exactly the same conclusion everyone else had reached. In his eyes, Paredes had crossed a line that simply cannot be defended. Even during the live television broadcast, the verdict seemed to arrive instantly. Alan Shearer described how Paredes appeared to throw multiple punches toward an opponent's face. Joe Hart summed up the entire incident in only 2 words: disgusting behavior. And it wasn't just rivals or neutral observers saying it. Spain manager Luis de la Fuente spent part of his post-tournament celebrations discussing Argentina's conduct instead of simply enjoying the victory. He described the scenes as intolerable and unacceptable, especially coming from players whose quality he had praised before the final. He also pointed to the way his own squad remained composed despite the aggression they faced. When the winning coach spends more time praising self-control than celebrating a World Cup title, it's a strong sign that the opposition crossed the line. When so many respected voices independently reach the same conclusion, it becomes difficult to dismiss the criticism as just another opinion. Spain's players themselves seemed convinced they had won the moral battle as well. During the victory parade through Madrid, teenage sensation Lamine Yamal was seen smiling while holding a fan-made sign, joking about the entire confrontation by comparing it to a celebrity boxing match. That moment said everything. The newly crowned world champions were so unaffected by the confrontation that one of their youngest stars turned it into a joke in front of hundreds of thousands of celebrating fans. When the team you tried to intimidate is laughing about it from the top of an open bus, the optics are not in your favor. Some voices even demanded punishments far beyond a simple 3-match suspension. Former Aston Villa striker Gabby Agbonlahor was among the strongest critics, arguing on TalkSport that FIFA's response must be severe enough to make sure nobody ever repeats scenes like these again. You can be devastated after losing, he argued, but you still have to lose with class. If Paredes wanted to fight, there are places for that, and a World Cup pitch against Eric Garcia certainly isn't one of them. He was particularly critical of the way Gabby was handled, describing it as unacceptable to throw around a 21-year-old player like that before bluntly calling Paredes a coward. His conclusion couldn't have been stronger. If the decision were his, he said, he would ban him from the entire next tournament. Some people wanted the punishment to go even further. An entire tournament. That's far beyond the minimum 3-match suspension. And it shows just how much criticism Leandro Paredes personally attracted. But then something unexpected happened. The one voice arguing against suspensions came from the last person anyone expected to hear it from, Gabby. The very player Paredes dragged to the ground. One of the players directly involved in the incident. When asked whether Argentina's players deserved bans, Gabby surprised almost everyone. Honestly, he said, I don't think they should be banned. He admitted the scenes created a terrible image, especially for young fans watching around the world, but he also argued that football has always had an emotional and physical side. In his view, the proper solution would have been to deal with it during the match itself. Show the red card, punish the players immediately, and leave it there instead of handing out suspensions weeks later. It's an incredibly generous perspective from someone who was thrown onto the grass, and because it comes from one of the people involved, it's probably the strongest argument against further punishment. His message was simple. Deal with it in the heat of the moment. Don't allow a few chaotic seconds to define an entire career. Whether you agree or disagree, it's a fair point, and arguably the most balanced opinion in this entire debate. Which makes it all the more striking that the strongest call for understanding came from a Spanish player rather than anyone inside the Argentina camp. Because that's where this story really changed. The brawl itself wasn't the only issue. It was everything that followed. As the football world continued debating the incident over the next few days, very little from Argentina sounded like accountability. Paredes, the player at the center of the controversy, eventually broke his silence with a lengthy statement about pride, passion, and the honor of representing what he described as the greatest Argentina team in history. Yet there wasn't a single acknowledgement of grabbing an opponent by the throat. Enzo Fernandez, who had already been sent off in the final, shared his own message praising the squad's pride, humility, and commitment. Again, there was no mention of the red card or the confrontation after the whistle. Head coach Lionel Scaloni defended his squad as warriors and brushed aside much of the criticism by saying outsiders simply didn't understand his players, while repeating that they knew how to lose with dignity. Even Lionel Messi, the captain and the biggest name in world football, chose not to publicly address the incident. From the outside, it looked as though a team being heavily criticized had responded by doubling down on how proud they were. There was only one exception. Just one. Assistant coach Roberto Ayala, who had been filmed with his hands around Dani Olmo's neck, eventually apologized. Obviously, I'm sorry, he admitted, explaining that emotions had overwhelmed him in the moment. It was the only clear apology to come from the Argentina camp. But even that apology became complicated when Ayala suggested his reaction had been triggered by something Olmo allegedly said, and insisted the incident was more of a shove than a punch. Olmo rejected that explanation completely. Speaking afterward, he argued that anyone who tries to justify throwing a punch by blaming someone else's words isn't truly apologizing at all. He even said Ayala was lying because, according to him, no such comment had ever been made. So the only apology that emerged from Argentina immediately became another point of disagreement, with the player involved refusing to accept it. And that's ultimately what so many people inside football were pointing toward. Not simply the fight itself, but the lack of a straightforward admission that mistakes had been made. At the same time, this story deserves balance. Argentina remain an exceptionally talented and tightly connected group. Scaloni's emotional defense of his players clearly came from genuine loyalty. His words about his warriors and their determination reflected a coach standing beside a squad he deeply believes in. The emotions after losing a World Cup final are almost impossible for most people to imagine. And don't forget, Gavi himself, the player who ended up on the ground, still doesn't believe lengthy suspensions are necessary. A lifetime ban was never a realistic outcome, and many would argue that extremely long suspensions for a few chaotic post-match moments would also be excessive. There's a perfectly reasonable argument that the players should have been dismissed during the game, the federation fined afterward, and everyone moved on. That's essentially Gavi's position, and it's one plenty of people share. But supporters of stronger action keep returning to the same point. The confrontation itself may have been an emotional loss of control. What they struggle to accept is everything that happened afterward. Thierry Henry said it best. You can lose control for a second, but respect should never disappear. Critics argue that in the days after the final, very little suggested genuine accountability. Argentina turned away during the trophy ceremony. Public statements focused on pride rather than apologies. The only apology that did arrive included an explanation that the other side rejected. From there, the issue moved beyond the players and into FIFA's hands. Under FIFA's disciplinary regulations, sanctions for violent conduct and mass confrontations can begin with a minimum 3-match suspension and increase depending on each individual's involvement. Any punishment could potentially affect World Cup qualifiers or future international competitions. The disciplinary investigation has also been discussed alongside separate scrutiny involving another incident from the tournament, leaving multiple issues under review at the same time. The biggest uncertainty is timing. FIFA has not announced exactly when any final decisions will be made, and with no immediate competitive fixture scheduled, questions remain over when possible suspensions would actually be served. Even beyond FIFA, some reports suggested the controversy may already be influencing opinions elsewhere. According to those reports, Real Madrid cooled interest in Enzo Fernandez after his tournament, with his overall conduct raising questions about composure at the highest level. Whether fair or not, some observers viewed his performances as those of a player whose emotions had overtaken his judgment. If those reports are accurate, then football's transfer market may already be delivering its own verdict without waiting for official punishments. The wider picture extends even further. Veteran goalkeeper Emiliano Martinez, one of the defining faces of Argentina's recent success and a World Cup winner in 2022, has openly spoken about considering his international future. If that happens, it would symbolize a golden generation gradually reaching the end of its journey. And in that case, the ugly scenes after the final whistle could become part of the lasting memory of how this era is remembered. So where does everything stand? Across football, many prominent voices have strongly criticized Argentina's conduct. Some believe suspensions for the main offenders would be justified, while others point to Gavi's call for forgiveness and argue that on-field punishment should have been enough. It's an interesting contrast. The winning coach criticized the incident. Former players criticized it. Television pundits criticized it. Yet one of the loudest voices asking for restraint was a player directly caught up in the confrontation himself. The remaining question is the same one Wayne Rooney raised. Will FIFA impose meaningful sanctions on one of the biggest teams in world football, or will it ultimately choose a softer approach? Football has seen controversial disciplinary decisions before, and many supporters are waiting to see which path is taken this time. Now I'd like to hear your opinion. Should FIFA follow the tougher approach and hand out significant suspensions? Or should it adopt Gavi's view that the red cards on the day should have been enough? Share your thoughts below. And as soon as FIFA officially announces its decision, we'll break down every ruling and every suspension the moment it becomes official. Because this story still isn't finished.